I'd like to welcome Devin Jackson of NOLA News, Blue Chip Scouting, and the Steelers Depot onto the Read and Reaction podcast to preview Saturday's Florida-LSU game in Baton Rouge. Devin, appreciate you joining the show, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I appreciate you having me on, and always down to talk ball, football. Obviously LSU as well. Been a fan of them most of my life, so kind of seen the ups and downs of the program. Is currently down, but excited to talk about the game and what to expect from it.
Yeah, we're certainly fired up for this LSU game on Saturday. Last year, 2020, obviously was an interesting season for both of these teams. LSU coming off of a magical 2019 season. 2020 was not the storybook that you saw in 2019, where Ed Ogeron probably could have been the king of Louisiana in January 2020 and that night in the Superdome. But help us understand last season for LSU, and you come into the swamp. All right. Now, I got to give like a trigger warning here to Florida fans here, because we're talking about this game. This game has upset us, Devin. This game upset us greatly, but it should have been a shoe-in victory. Kyle Pitts, they end up even letting him rest, ends up turning into a weird game on a foggy night. And about the only good thing to come out of it for the Florida Gators was that awesome picture of Kadarius Toney at midfield kneeling after the game. But LSU comes in with about half a roster and about 3 touchdown underdog, and somehow finds a way to pull off an upset in the swamp in the infamous shoe throw game. And I'm hoping that this game on Saturday we'll finally put that conversation behind us, but we'll probably never forget that game. Devin, what was your impression from an LSU perspective of that upset, though, in the swamp?
I was just as Florida fans. I mean, that team up until the point they played pretty much down everybody they played. I mean, it was ugly defensively. They were blowing coverages. They were just not tackling well in general before that game. But something clicked in that game. They also had Max Johnson kind of assert himself as the new starting quarterback. He still is now. And he probably wouldn't have been, if Miles Brennan was healthy, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. But he came in and he was slinging all over the place. To Keyshawn Boutte, Terrace Marshall when he was still on the team. And they just found something that worked that night. And like you said, it was a very weird game because, you go back and watch the film of that game, you can't see anything like at the end of the third and the entire fourth quarter. It's just a thick fog, and I don't even know how they saw on the field. That it just baffles me that you can play in those conditions. I mean, anything past 15 to 20 yards, like obviously no one attempted a deep ball that far, but I can't imagine doing that and then the ball just gets lost in the air because you have no clue where it is. But it was definitely a very interesting game from LSU perspective. It definitely kind of helped them close out the 2020 season strong. They were able to kind of bounce back and, be able to win a couple games down the stretch. So it was a big catapult game for LSU. Obviously, it destroyed Florida's chances to go to the college football playoff, even though, they went on to play Alabama really, really close in the SEC championship. But that was a game that Florida, I thought they had in the bag, and LSU really didn't have a shot to win. I was very surprised that they won.
Still a stunning result to this day. And that's some of what we've seen in Dan Mullen's era here, where some of these games that you think you kind of have, you got to show up every single week and play. And sometimes this Florida program kind of struggles with that at times. And LSU is certainly, it feels wrong to feel comfortable against LSU in general. And I think last year, we were comfortable going into that game. But hey, LSU, y'all got Auburn and Alabama out west. A&M's kind of that new rival, that new age rival that's coming up. We got Georgia, Tennessee, Florida State, and everything. But this LSU Florida game has probably been the best rivalry in between, at least from the Florida perspective, in the last 2 decades, because it feels like when Florida State's up, Florida's down, and vice versa. Georgia's certainly had some good games, but again, usually one side is rolling in that rivalry more often than not. How does the LSU perceive this rivalry with Florida? Is this like a game y'all get pretty fired up for? Because I mean, I really it's back and forth all the time. There's actually upsets in some years, like we saw last year. Florida's pulled upsets against LSU at times, so it's pretty unpredictable most years.
Yeah, it's become more of a competitive rivalry. I mean, both teams, every time these two teams match up, it ends up in an instant classic. I mean, so many games have been decided by field goals and crazy plays. I mean, even in the national championship year for LSU, it was a game that went down to the wire, well into the fourth quarter. So these two teams, they play very well. I mean, both teams are really talented, and it's definitely a game that LSU fans get fired up for. Obviously, Bama is still the top of that, but I would argue that in second or third would probably be Florida. Because every year it goes down to the wire in that game. So it's definitely an important game to win from that perspective. And it's kind of a measuring stick for LSU, because if they can compete or beat Florida in certain years, I mean, they probably have a good shot to compete with Bama, because those programs are kind of at the upper echelon. SEC is pretty much, or was for a while, Bama, LSU, Florida, and Georgia as some of the top programs. So it was definitely an important game for measuring stick wise, and just to see if this team is going to be good or not this year. So it's definitely an important game from that perspective.
Always a great uniform game too. The purple and gold contrast with the orange blue. It's always a good uniform matchup on the field too. Hey, that's the big picture. We appreciate you. Good perspective on that there, Devin. But let's dive into 2021 here. 3-3 start so far for the Tigers. You got McNeese wins against McNeese, Central Michigan. Hi, Jim McElwain. How's it going? In Mississippi State, and losses against UCLA, Auburn, and Kentucky. We feel your pain on that Kentucky road loss, man. That's not a place you want to lose a whole lot, but we just did the same. Good on Kentucky for following up that win last week, by the way. 2021, it's not been the bounce back season that many around the LSU program had hoped for, especially with that win against Florida late in the season. You saw some optimism coming into this year. You changed the coordinators over. Ed O feels like, oh, this is more my program again. He's going around saying that UCLA, it's obviously a tough opener there. They've played some okay football this year. That's not a terrible loss, but it's really unbelievable to me that, considering the man just won a national title in 2019, we're in a position where there's legitimate conversations around Coach Orgeron's job security here. And I just want to know what the heck is going on out there that's even a real conversation right now, because it's people that are close to the program, media members that are talking about this. It's not just it's not Skip Bayless throwing something out on TV. It's legitimate people talking about this.
Yeah, they've seen so much regression with the program in the last 2 years. And, 2020 was a tough year. I mean, kind of judging a football team off of the product that it was last year is difficult. I mean, obviously some teams were able to adjust, some weren't. LSU was already losing a lot of players from that national championship team. Plus you have, new quarterback, bunch of new skill positions, pretty much a brand new defense outside like Derek Stingley and a few other guys. So it was going to be a tough transition. But I think what's been the part that kind of is not sitting right with some people is one, the Title IX things off the field issues that LSU has surrounding the program, with the sexual assault allegations and things that have happened under Orgeron's reign. That has been kind of a dark cloud over the program, in addition to some of his off the field antics. Like, he's a very rah type of guy. He's gonna, go back and forth with people. He said, he made the comment about UCLA and the sissy blue shirts, and that obviously kind of blew up in his face because they, UCLA came out and out physical LSU. And then recently, just getting triggered by a troll fan call. I mean, it's the small things now that if he was winning, it wouldn't matter because, winning cures all. But now that they're not winning and they're struggling, they're not able to get, those signature wins they're used to getting, it's now become a problem. So it's a combination of things for Orgeron. He's kind of in a tough spot. because his schedule really doesn't do him any favors. I mean, you play Florida this week, you got Ole Miss next. Then 2 weeks later, you got Alabama. Then you still got Texas A&M, Arkansas. So that's 5 ranked teams right there that you have to play the rest of the season. So they have maybe a couple wins in that. Maybe they are able to get. It'll be a miracle for this team to be bowl eligible, just based off of the schedule. They needed to win that Auburn game to kind of stay afloat, but losing that game was kind of a backbreaker. So the games that they should win, they're not winning. You know, I can't imagine 2 years ago you would say in 2021 UCLA is going to beat LSU by multiple scores, or that Auburn would not have a great offense, but they would still beat you. Things like that you wouldn't expect a couple of years ago. Even when he wasn't winning the national championship, they were at least handling those games, but they're not now. So it comes kind of with the territory. And he even said that himself in a press conference that he knows the expectations that LSU has, or being an LSU coach is. You have to win to stay in a job. You can have a year down or two, but you can't have multiple years down. So it's in a tough position. I mean, we never really seen LSU struggle like this, not even under Les Miles. It was just, Les Miles had to go just because, he started losing games he shouldn't have lost as well. So it's a tough draw for Orgeron right now. And he honestly needs to pull out 2 or 3 of these games to realistically get himself out of hot water.
So it's definitely a lot of it's on the field stuff, but you made reference to the Title IX issues, and obviously LSU's had some reckonings they're dealing with going back to the Les Miles era with that stuff too. So extra sensitive topic out there in Baton Rouge right now. Certainly some of that off the field stuff's weighing on them. You got athletic director Scott Woodward coming over from A&M a couple years ago. He's the man that poached Jimbo Fisher from Florida State. Already hearing about Jimbo to LSU rumblings again, which we heard while he was at Florida State. Are you buying that at all? Are you buying that in the least? Or is it just every time the LSU job comes up and his name gets mentioned, it's a law?
The thing is with the SEC is that these coaches just, once you're in, you just get cycled around to every school. I mean,
right.
Derek Mason went from being Vanderbilt's coach, now he's Auburn's defensive coordinator. Lane Kiffin, we know where he's been all over the place. So there's going to be a lot of SEC names that get thrown in this job. I mean, Lane Kiffin's probably going to get brought up, Jimbo Fisher. But Jimbo Fisher has built Texas A&M's program to where they're competitive. I mean, they beat Bama just now. There's no way that he's just going to jump ship from one SEC school to the next just because, it opened up. So, if Orgeron were to lose a job, I don't know who they would go after, because they really haven't had a national coaching search since before Les Miles. I mean, they went from Les Miles to Orgeron as the interim coach, and they just kept him. So this would be the first time in a long time, LSU actually looks nationwide. Now, I expect them to do a nationwide search if it gets to that point. But
right.
I don't think they're going to go after any SEC head coach. It just doesn't make sense to me, because you're just creating more issues. Plus, you need someone that's going to be able to. You need a really great recruiter along with a great coach. And Orgeron can kind of recruit, but they're losing, 5 stars to Alabama and other schools. So they got to really get somebody that can do a little bit of everything. They can't just get someone that's just a great SEC coach. They need a little bit of everything.
It makes y'all feel better. We're losing 5 stars to Alabama too. So it's
everyone
trend. All right, let's jump into the position groups here. From an outside perspective here at the quarterback position, I've seen LSU as a pass happy team that struggled to run the ball. But in reality, if you look at the stats, in half their games this season, it's been pretty well balanced between their rushing and passing attempts. Max Johnson, he's a sophomore quarterback out of Athens, Georgia. We were reminded 28 times during the broadcast last year that he's Brad Johnson's son, the former Tampa Bay Bucs Super Bowl winning quarterback. He's averaging just under 300 yards a game passing this season, 17 TDs, 4 interceptions. And to me, the most impressive play of the year was the over the head, behind the back pass against UCLA. I'm not going to lie. I was really hoping he was going to complete that one.
Yeah, that was – listen, he's made some really great plays, but he's also made some plays that's like, what are you doing? That was definitely one of those. But he has been the bright spot for the offense. I mean, even with like a lack of a running game, offensive line, just shuffling, constant shuffles, and throwing to a relatively, young receiving core outside Kayshon Boutte. I mean, they have a bunch of freshmen and sophomores starting right now all over the place. So the offense is going to be a work in progress no matter who they had calling plays. I know they changed play callers and whatnot, but he has been the bright spot. But unfortunately, I mean, he's going to have to create magic on Saturday because there's no Kayshon Boutte. He's out for the season. They got announced, I believe, earlier this week. Plus, we'll get to the defense in a minute, but they're missing 2 of their starting corners. Mm-hmm. So they have a lot of injury issues right now, which could play a part in, Orgeron keeping his job because, I mean, you're dealing with your best players being out. I mean, Kayshon Boutte is probably a future first-round pick. Derek Stingley, obviously a first-round pick. Eli Ricks, potential to be first-round, maybe second-round pick. So, I mean, they have a lot of talent that they're missing, big talent. So it's going to be on the left arm of Max Johnson being able to create plays, keeping the drive going. But he's going to be running for his life because, I mean, Florida's defensive line is pretty talented up front. I mean, you got Brendan Cox, Zachary Carter is two of the guys that are going to be coming after him. And while Johnson is mobile, he's able to get away. I don't know if he's going to be able to do that all game long. But like I said, LSU's offensive line also has been kind of a mess. They had a lot of new starters. They've had some of their veterans in and out of line, like Austin Deculus and a few other guys. So, kind of looking at it from that perspective, it's really going to come down to can LSU move the ball through the air? Because running the ball has been an issue for them. I know they did it a little bit better against Kentucky. They were able to get over 100 yards and, get some success from that perspective. But they just could not keep pace with Kentucky. So I just worry about how much they're going to be able to run the ball against Florida. Florida may just stack the box, force LSU's young receivers to beat them in man-to-man and just let it ride. I mean, it's going to be a tough game for LSU.
Well, you talk about that running game that's been struggling so far, and Tyrion Davis-Price, he's leading the backfield with 67 carries and 287 yards. Corey Kiner, he's a freshman. He comes in, he spells Davis-Price once in a while. But how heavily – you talked about Stingley, you talk about Ricks and Boutte here. All these guys, Stingley could be a top 5 pick in the draft. That's how talented we're talking about. Some of these players are missing, but one guy that doesn't get mentioned a ton is how heavily does the absence of former 5-star running back John Emery weigh on this running game? I mean, I saw him early on, and I know he never really took over full time at any point, but the man looks like a monster when he gets the ball.
Yeah, it's definitely taking a toll. I mean, with LSU, they like to do kind of a running back by committee approach. So, if someone gets hot, they'll let them keep going. But Emery, looked good early on. But having him go down is a tough blow to the running game. I mean, Davis-Price is doing what he can with what's in front of him. Offensive line is starting to get a little bit more gelled, a little bit more traction. So you see him kind of reap the rewards of that. But in general, I mean, this team is struggling trying to have some consistency running the ball. And, when you don't have one of your top backs back there, and you have other talented guys, but it just kind of you're missing something with that.
There's not that elite level like
yeah,
there usually is in LSU.
right. So Emory takes it to another level. Davis
Mm-hmm.
Price is a serviceable back that, pretty good college running back, but LSU is used to having superstars in the backfield.
Right.
So that's kind of the tough part with not having him on the field to be able to create and make something out of nothing. Because if there's nothing there for LSU running game, there's just nothing there. There's no individual performance that's going to be allow them to break off big runs. That's just not how they're built this year.
Well,
so.
to build on your point, Devin, to offer some perspective on just how weak this running game has been this year, I mentioned 287 yards on 67 carries through 6 games. Leonard Fournette himself, he ran for over 200 yards in 4 different games in 2015. He ran for 284 against Ole Miss in 2016. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, you said, they're more of a passing offensive now. Well, Clyde Edwards-Helaire still ran for over 100 yards in 7 games in 2019 with quite a good passing attack. So this is really different look for LSU football. And we'll move into the wide receivers and tight ends here. You mentioned the loss of Kayshon Boutte there, Devin, but he has by far been their most dynamic player this year. What injury did he suffer? Why is he out? And 38 receptions, 9 touchdowns through 6 games so far.
Yeah, so it was a lower body injury against Kentucky. I think he just landed wrong after he made a catch, and he was out for the game, and then they announced he was out for the season. So it was unfortunate. I mean, he was literally the superstar on the team. I mean, even with everything going wrong, all the games they lost, he still performed. There was, you expected him to make big plays, and he did. And that's a rare skill set to have. The defense is going to cue in on what he does and double team and send double teams his way because he's our most dynamic player and he's still making plays. So that's just how important he was to the offense. So not having him around is going to be a big loss for LSU. But they've had some other guys step up, some other young guys. Jack Beck, like the receiver / tight end, he's had a really big season for them and kind of become like a top 3 or 4 option in this offense. And they're just still kind of looking for that next guy. It's a bunch of different receivers right now that haven't really showed consistency on a game-to-game basis, which, is kind of disheartening for LSU because they're used to having so many good receivers. That's just kind of their MO to have good receivers, a good running game, and whatnot. But some players to watch: Dion Smith, he's a freshman, number 6, 6'3", 203. He's had some big catches throughout the year, has 2 touchdowns. Trey Palmer as well. He's been kind of the receiver / returner, kind of slot guy. He's another person to kind of keep out for and to play a larger role. And then finally, Brian Thomas Jr., another freshman, 6'5", 198. So they have some big bodies out there, some guys that go and put the ball in the air. But like we talked about early on, freshmen and sophomores.
Right.
These are super young guys that are literally getting experience on the fly. So they're going to be facing against Florida's defensive backs, which is a really good unit. And they're going to have to be big, because Florida plays really good coverage. So we'll see how that matches up. But yeah, those are some of the look and some of the receivers that LSU will be throwing out there. It's a lot of names people don't know. I mean, outside Kayshon Boutte, most people, the general public, probably couldn't name another LSU receiver. That's just how much he's been great compared to the rest of the roster. So
it just shows the roster turnover they've dealt with in the last couple of years that you're starting this many freshmen and sophomore. I mean, really, the next 3 leading receivers, like you mentioned, Beck, Thomas Jr., Smith, they're all freshmen behind Boutte, who is just a true sophomore. Not like the guy's in his 4th season or anything. He's killed it. But hey, I want to talk about Boutte, and we'll dip into your scouting skills here a little bit here, Devin. Does not possess elite size. He's only 6 feet tall. What does he do that makes him so good that will probably end up making him assuming he gets come back, have a great year next year, stay healthy, good shot. He's a 1st-round receiver in the 2023 NFL draft, like you mentioned.
Yeah, his suddenness in and out of routes. I mean, he's able to get in and out of his routes quickly. I mean, he can change direction, flip his hips and just be explosive out of his stance. And then with the ball in his hands, he turns into a dynamic player. He can break away and pretty much break all angles. I mean, he's had several long touchdowns and just his short career at LSU. I mean, he had a 300-yard game in his freshman season. Even against UCLA, he busts two big plays to score touchdowns. So he does a little bit of all. He can win at the catch point, high point the ball. He shows the ability to adjust, on the fly in the air. Shows some great body control. So he kind of possesses all those elite skills you would like to see in a college receiver. And he honestly, before the injury, I mean, there were discussions that he may be the best LSU receiver to come out of LSU. I mean,
Wow.
you had Odell Beckham, Jarvis Landry, Justin Jefferson recently, Jamar Chase,
Yeah.
Terrace Marshall. I mean, you have so many guys that have come out of LSU recently, and he could potentially be the best one just because of how explosive he is, how much he wins at the catch point, and just how much he dominates the game. I mean, it's not even like he's a volume catcher where he's catching short passes. I mean, he catches everything, like back shoulder, down the field passes, deep comebacks, over the middle passes, crossing routes. So you ask him to do something, he's going to do it and do it at a high level. So, that's just kind of a look at who he is and how much he impacts the game on the field.
So it seems like a common theme. Another position group, another top dog down for you guys over there at LSU. So it's just that's a big loss with Boutte for the season, though. On the offensive line, you had all five. You mentioned some shuffling going on, but coming into the season, all five starters, four of which were seniors, returned for 2021. So that on paper that seemed great. What have some of the weaknesses been so far in this group though in 2021, and what are some signs of optimism going forward?
Yeah, pass protection was a big issue early on in the season, just because they didn't have any continuity together and they just couldn't communicate very well. There was just a lot of stunts and a lot of things thrown at them that they missed. And Johnson, luckily for him, he's somewhat mobile and able to create out of nothing. Because if not, it would have been even a longer day against like UCLA. But when they played those kind of smaller programs, they kind of slowly made some progress, slowly, got going. I mean, even in the Auburn game, they played really well in that first half. They went up 13-0. They looked really good offensively. They just couldn't finish drives with touchdowns, but they were blocking well. They were able to create lanes for Johnson to throw the football, but they just couldn't get the running game going. They couldn't sustain blocks in the run game. They couldn't get movement at the line of scrimmage. They finally do that against Kentucky, but it just nothing has seemed to match up. Where they pass protect well, they don't run block necessarily well in the same game, and then when they run well, they have issues with pass protection. So it's kind of backwards for them. They can't seem to get it both on track at the same time. But the healthier they get, I think the better this group will be, just going forward and playing more together. So I think you'll see a bit more improved offensive line. I don't think it's going to be a dominant one that wins the point of the attack. I think they'll have their plays where they're able to create lanes in the running game, but I just worry that if the game gets out of hand early, which happened against Kentucky, which forced them to throw the ball almost the entire game, and really run the ball as much successful as they were. Um, if the game gets out of hand early, it can be a long day for that offense and offensive line.
Let's move on to the defense side of the ball here. What are some noticeable changes you've seen from new defensive coordinator Durante Jones' scheme from last season's disaster with Pope Pelini?
I mean, it's been less blown coverages. I mean, that's kind of been the highlight. I mean, last year, just every game there was several blown coverages. I mean, to some degree, there still has been this year, but that isn't because of the scheme. It's just the players are young.
Mhm.
and they have a lot of new players constantly rotating in because of injuries. So, I mean, you already playing without Derek Steen last game, then you lose Eli Ricks. Now you're playing with two corners that are not used to being on the outside. That's a big adjustment to, pretty much expecting Stingley and Eli Ricks to both be out there most of the season. So that's kind of been the big, thing for them. The pass rush has been hit or miss for LSU. Usually we expect them to dominate in the front four and able to get home without sending pressure, but they just haven't been able to do it at a consistent basis this year. So you see blitzes that they employ, and it leaves holes over the middle of the field and in the boundary, and that's where you start to see some of their issues. Um, in terms of the linebacker play, it's been certainly down to what they're used to or compared to. They had kind of Jacoby Stevens play that, kind of safety linebacker hybrid. Had Jabril Cox, who obviously they both got drafted and went to NFC East teams. Now you have Mike Jones Jr., transfer from Clemson. You got Damone Clark, who's had his kind of fair shares of ups and downs at the linebacker position. They've just struggled to cover in space. That's kind of been the big thing. And that's what kind of makes me worried about the Ole Miss game. I know it's not till next week. Ole Miss attacks linebackers all game long. That's what they do, and LSU has a big problem with that. So that's why I kind of worry about that game, because they're just going to attack the middle of the field constantly and whatnot. But like I said, that's down the road, looking down the road. But the linebacker group, they just haven't played up to LSU's expectations, at least, because we're used to seeing over the last 5-6 years they have good linebackers. I mean, Devin White came through. Patrick Queen came through. Last year, Jabril Cox, Jacoby Stevens kind of took over that role. But now, Damone Clark, Mike Jones Jr., some other guys that have been filling in, they just haven't played well enough in space. I think that's the biggest issue is not necessarily on running plays, because they've done what they can, but passing downs, they just struggle covering in space.
Well, they might be dreading that Ole Miss matchup, but Florida likes to run the ball. This is a running offense, and you mentioned Damone Clark. I saw he leads the team with 69 tackles. Next closest Tiger has 34. A linebacker, Micah Baskerville, 34 is the next leading tackler. So clearly he's at least cleaning up in the running game a little bit here. You like the Florida matchup much better on the offensive side of the ball. You want to LSU, are they more geared to stop the run right now than they are the pass?
Definitely. They have to stop the run to have a chance to win. I mean, you can't lose all the players that they lost in the secondary and expect to win the game. I mean, big plays are going to happen because you have young corners out there. You have a young secondary that hasn't played together much. So if they don't stop the run, I mean, that just opens up play action for Florida, displaces linebackers. There's going to be a lot of open green over the middle of the field. So that's where things can become an issue. And that's what became an issue against Kentucky. Kentucky just ran the ball, and hit play action, big plays over the top. That's just pretty much how they attack a game. But Florida is more of a, kind of they'll work horizontally, they'll work vertically. They do a little bit of everything. So you have to be prepared for that. And LSU has to be prepared to tackle in space, because they will definitely be tested on the outside, not just down the field, but in the short and screen game as well. So tackling in both, kind of the traditional run game and extension to the run game and screens, that's going to be very important in this matchup. Because if they're not making tackles like that, and if Florida's bringing out chunk runs, in both kind of those departments, then it'll be a long day for their defense.
We've talked about the absence of, so many players on this roster, but Stingley and Ricks in particular, maybe no position group hit harder than the defensive backs. These are two NFL level defensive backs that we're missing here. Who's stepping up to fill those shoes?
Cordell Flott. He's been kind of the bright spot, even with Ricks and Stingley on the field. He has been making plays all over the field, pass breakups, just disrupting in the secondary. So LSU is always going to have good corners, or good defensive backs, I should say. That's not going to be an issue. It's just going to be about how much time they have together, how much can they play together and still be successful and still do the things they need to do to win football games. So I think for LSU, they're going to rely on a lot on Flott because he's become kind of their go-to guy with their top corners down. So he's been playing very well. They've been very impressed with what he's brought to the table. And then safety Jay Ward has done a solid job as well, just on the back end. So those are two guys that kind of been keeping this team afloat in the secondary with a lot of people kind of in and out of the lineup. But it's going to be important for those two guys to play well again and kind of help out on the back end and prevent some big plays.
How's the kicking and punting game going this year?
No complaints from either. No missed field goals, no mixed extra points from Cade York. He's one of the more reliable kickers. And
has he been there for 10 years?
I'll tell you what, LSU, they start their kickers and punters as freshmen, and they will just ride it out. Yeah. And it feels like they're there forever. But yeah, he's been there forever. But no complaints on really either player. I mean, they've done what they can in punting wise, kicking wise. Special teams has been not at all an issue for LSU, which is a good thing because they've had other issues, but they can rely on their kickers to make needed field goals, and I'm sure that they'll definitely be in use at some point on Saturday.
Yeah, the punting game's going well too so far.
Yeah, no complaints punting game either. They're getting set up. I mean, defensively, I mean they're doing, or I should say, special teams wise, punting for the defense. They're doing as much as they can to keep opponents on their side of the territory. So no complaints again. Like I said, from the kicking game, they've done a solid job in both.
So based on our conversation today, we're hearing a lot about everything that's missing. And then we started the conversation, though, talking about Coach O's job status and everything. Is there any consideration being given to the fact that this team is struggling because they're rolling out tons of freshmen and sophomores to get experience? Could this year be chalked up as a real rebuilding year versus like, another year where we're struggling? Or is there just so many issues off the field too that's really weighing in on this as well?
I think it really depends on how their effort looks throughout the rest of the season.
Yeah.
Because we know that they're probably not going to beat all these teams. I mean, it's just not going to happen just based on everything that's in front of them. But I think it matters more how they look in those games. Are they competitive? Are they able to withstand punches that they're going to take? Because they're going to take a lot over the next month or so.
Mm-hmm.
Are they responding to Coach O's coaching? Are they responding to the staff? It's going to be a lot of things like that because now they have a bunch of injuries. That's not unknown now. But can you still make something happen even when your top guys are missing? And I think that's the important question that LSU AD and a lot of LSU personnel are going to be asking. It's not about any more wins and losses because they're going to take more losses than they win over the next month or so probably. But it's going to be about, can this team compete? Can they pull off an upset or two? Can they show signs of life? Because at times, against Kentucky, I mean, they just look dead in the water.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's where the concern comes in. It's not just about off-field issues, not just about the rebuilding. It's like even when you have a lot of young players and a lot of things to recover, it's like also like, you're LSU, so you have to figure that out, because Bama obviously always has a lot of turnover, and Clemson and all these revered top programs, Ohio State. So if you can't kind of retain or regroup your talent that you have, then that becomes a problem, and that's where they start to maybe think about making that move.
Great information here today from Devin. I'm going to put you on the spot real quick. Give me a prediction for the game on Saturday. Florida, I got Florida as a 10-point favorite from what I'm seeing so far. I've never seen it that high in Baton Rouge. That alone makes me nervous. Baton Rouge, tough spot for us. We get some wins there once in a while, but that's no place we walk into that we normally have great success in. So what are you thinking for Saturday?
Well, the thing with that is that it's an early afternoon game. LSU has historically struggled at home in the early games. I mean, at night, they're a completely different team. We know that the atmosphere is different. But I just have to believe that Florida probably wins this game by a couple of touchdowns. I don't think it gets as ugly as I'm hoping it doesn't. Like, I think probably like 31-17 or something along those lines would be suitable for LSU to be okay with that loss. But if they get off to a rough start, it could get ugly real quick. So I got Florida winning the game, though. I think LSU just has too much to overcome. And, even being at home, I just don't think it'll be enough for them.
Nice try at some fake humility. We fell for it last year. We won't fall for it again. Nice try over there, man. Well, we're on our toes. We need some revenge for 2020. So it's still LSU. You can't sleep on LSU, man. So hopefully it's a good game. Devin, tell people where they can find your work. Again, if you're into the NFL draft and scouting, Devin's an awesome follow on Twitter, but tell us where we could follow your work.
Yeah, so on Twitter, my Twitter name is @RealD_Jackson. Post a lot of clips and kind of blurbs about different prospects on there. And then BlueChipScouting.com is where I have scouting reports, weekly reviews because I cover the Mountain West and MAC conferences for Blue Chip Scouting, and then Steelers Depot. I don't do anything with them until draft season. I'll do some profiles on there as well. And then also I'll be doing some features over at riseanddraft.com later in the season once the season kind of ends. So I'll be talking with prospects and kind of learning their stories and doing that. But that's where you can find all my work. Like I said, I post various clips throughout the week of different prospects, trying to get to as many as I can before the actual process starts at the end of the season in January. But like I said, you can follow me on Twitter, @RealD_Jackson.
Devin Jackson, everyone, with the Florida LSU preview. Devin, again, thank you for joining the Read and Reaction podcast today.
Thanks for having me.